grace transformational, lighting the atmosphere. There's so much grace for you here.
All right. Well, if you would turn your attention to the screen, we'll start our pre-sermon video. Thank you.
Vision can be slippery, hard to define, even resistant to definition. But you know it when you see it. It's a matter of the heart. It's God's given insight into direction and purpose. Every dream started with vision. Every passion has been ignited by it. And every great accomplishment was made possible by this powerful gift. Vision is what keeps us persevering through the tough times and what compels us to travel that extra mile. Jesus had it in spades. His eye was always on his ultimate goal, laying down his life for his friends. I want that kind of vision. I want to see things that others can't. I want to be standing with a group of people, all of whom are staring at a pile of rocks. And I want to be able to see a marvelous work of art. I think that's what vision is.
Vision, the ability to see. Vision, the ability to not just see what's in front of you physically, but to see beyond what you see physically. Today, we want to welcome you to part 3 of the Engineering Your Vision series. And before I talk about today's title, I want to just kind of bring you up to speed on where we've been. 2 weeks ago, we introduced the whole concept of vision being something that's burning. We talked about it being born on the inside of you. It's something that's birthed. And last week, we talked about what? The title was Ready, Set, Wait, instead of ready, set, go. And so we talked about some of the things that's necessary for us to do and that anyone that has a vision needs to do before they actually execute the vision. And our character that we're using for this entire series overall is Nehemiah. And this is one of my favorite books. As a matter of fact, I was getting my hair cut this week, so my stylist always talks about, what are you ministering on? What's going on? And I started telling her, she said, is Nehemiah your favorite book? So I thought about it. I said, yeah, I think Nehemiah might be my favorite book. And it is an awesome book. If you want to learn anything about leadership, if you start dissecting the stuff that's in the book of Nehemiah, and it's almost like an autobiography because he starts to write, it's about him. And much of it is has to be written by him, but some of it they believe was written by the priest that was a priest during his time, which was Ezra. But anyway, today's title is In the Meantime. So last week we talked about ready, set, wait. So if you're going to wait, why are you waiting and what are you waiting for? We talked about last week while Nehemiah was waiting, we know that he prayed. And last week we talked about praying and planning. Praying and planning. That's what you do. You pray and you plan. You pray and you plan. You plan as if what you're praying for is going to happen. So you start planning for what you're praying for. So whatever it is that you're praying for, and remember, I'm going to ask you now up front, as we go through today's session, the last couple of weeks, I brought out 8 different areas of your life. And then there's really like 6, but I broke 1 down into 2 and added ministry as a division. But we each have 8 areas of our life. We have a spiritual life, you have a mental life, you have a physical life, you have a social life, you have a career, and you have a family life. We broke the family life into 2 parts in this series where we break it into spouse and children. And I added an 8th one that I call ministry. And I don't want you to just think we're talking about church when I say ministry. I want you to think about just service as ministry. Because you should serve not just at church, but you should serve in your community. You should serve wherever you are. You should be willing to serve. And that's something that God has put on the inside of all of us. We're not going to talk about that one today, But when we talk about it, I want you to be ready for it. And when you see it, I want you to recognize we're not just talking about serving at the church, like what we're traditionally used to, being an usher, being a greeter, or being, whatever you do at church. But today, we're talking about whatever area you picked. I'm going to ask you to pick two areas. I'm going to talk about two areas today that I believe are very important of our lives that we need vision in. And one of those is our physical life, and the other one is our family life. So I'll kind of hash some of that out while we go. But in any of those areas, how many of you have at least written out a statement about at least one area of your life or what you believe it should be and could be? And that's what we ask you to do so far in this series. And so, and I don't know what those areas are, but you can pick the one that you wrote about today, or you can pick the two that I'm going to talk about today. But what we're going to talk about is in the meantime, and we're going to look at what Nehemiah did in the meantime. And so, remember, well, first of all, let me explain what I mean by meantime. What do I mean by meantime? Meantime can have so many different meanings. One of the first meanings when you think of meantime is, what do I do while I'm waiting? What do I do while I'm waiting? And meantime really technically means the time before something happens. It's the time before an event that's expected to happen happens. The meantime is what's happening before that event happens. And in my world of engineering, and especially in industrial engineering, meantime is something that you actually can calculate, and it's something that's used. Just to give you an example, when you almost buy anything electronic, almost anything where there's a component that's made, then there's something that's called mean time between failures. That means that they calculate the time period. They test this thing. Remember we talked about testing? Remember that was one of the components of a vision, is when you lay it out, when it's birthed and it's born, there's a testing time. So in meantime between failures is the time where you test something. And I'll use one example. One example is, how many of you own a computer? Come on, where's the 6-year-olds? Yeah, we all own computers. And in your computer is probably something called a hard drive or either static drive. The hard drive is usually something that spins. And they used to publish, the meantime between failures. Basically, how long does it take? How long will this run before it fails? That's the meantime between failures. And they calculate that so that they can actually then calculate how long they can write the warranty for. So when you figure out, I have a warranty, if the warranty is for 2 years or for 90 days, then it's based on meantime between failure calculations. So what happened in the meantime? And sometimes during the test, it's not that it failed, you have to record why it failed. And if you can correct why it failed, then you can start another test, and you shouldn't have that same thing happen, but you've made a correction. And so that's one reason why you get so many updates for so many different things, because the meantime between failure calculations said this long, and now that it's failed, and especially they also look at when things start coming back, and you get something that didn't work properly when it came back. And for example, if you own an automobile, anybody ever had to take their car back because of a recall? So recalls happen when a certain component fails, and they don't recognize it until it's out, and the public is using it now. It's not a test. They should have tested that in the lab, but now you're the test. You bought it, and now you're the test. And so some of the test data that they're getting back is what you're sending back. You're saying, I turned my key off and the car kept on running, and that kind of stuff. And they say, ooh, we better check. Then they find out when that car was made, and they have all the data, where the components came from, and they check all of that, and they look at all that data and determine that, okay, we need to recall 25,000 cars that was built based between this time and that time. And so it's something that can be measured and calculated. Today, I want you to think about your life as at least one area of your life where you believe God for something. You're waiting for something. it's your vision for that area of your life. And the two areas that I'm going to talk about today is the physical life and your family life. But the meantime is, what do you do while you're waiting for what you're believing for? And so we already talked about a vision is something that's born. That for your area, if you're talking about your physical life, then vision is what was born on the inside of you for your physical life. For example, for me, and this is where I'm going with this, I've thought I was always kind of physically fit. And I try to make sure that I am, and for a lot of different reasons. And whatever reason in your physical life that you're doing what you do, it needs to be tied to your emotions. It's probably tied to something. For example, in my family, my mother and my father both had bypass heart surgeries because of something that was going on in their, in the circulatory system. And so I'm looking at all of this and I'm saying, okay, I got to do something different. And I have 7 siblings, so there's 8 of us. And there's indications from all of us that we need to look at that area of our lives physically. And both of my parents have passed away now. My mom passed away last year. She was 82, I believe. And my dad passed away, 2003. So, and he was younger. He was like 71. And so I thought, oh, my God, in 10 more years, I'll be just as old as my dad was when he passed away. And so actually, we started looking at this, my wife and I started looking at this about 26 years ago, at our physical lives. And what's going on in your physical life that should make a difference? What should be your vision for your physical life? And so we began to cut some things out. For example, that year, that January, the church that we were attending, Family Worship Center Church, we had a fast. We did a fast, and have been doing a fast every year in January where we do a Daniel fast, where you stop eating sweets and starches and a whole bunch of other stuff for 21 days. No meat, none of this stuff, no sweets, no desserts, none of this. For 21 days, if you can do it for 21 days, because that's how long Daniel was doing the fast, and they called it a Daniel fast. So we did this fast, and first time I'd ever done it, and we did no meat, no sugars, none of that stuff for 21 days. And after 21 days, of course, during the time that you're fasting, you're thinking, boy, I can't wait till this is over. I'm going to have you. And you start thinking about all the different things you want to eat that you couldn't eat for 21 days. And I remember the first time I had a soda, a pop, whatever you call it from whatever part of the country you're from, a soft drink. First time I had one of those after 21 days, it burned my throat. I was like, oh, my God, what's going on? And it was so sweet, and the sugar was so sweet. And one of the things that also helped me with the sugar was I read a book. The title of it was by Francis Hunter. What's her husband's name? I forget his husband. Anyway, both of them wrote the book. It's Are You Tired? After reading that book and going through the fast, we hardly use any sugar for anything anymore. And especially on an ongoing basis, we don't purchase beef, certain meats we don't buy, especially for our own diets at home. I may eat it when I'm out sometimes, but it's not a part of our normal diet. We cut a lot of things out of our normal diet that has made a difference for me in my life. And I love to run. It's one thing that wasn't a sin for me to do when I was younger. Any kind of sports were basically a sin. And so I love to run, and I still like to run. But the reason I'm using your physical life and a vision for your physical life is because right now I can't run like I used to run. It's not because I'm 61 and I used to run well when I was 30 or 40, but last year or sometime before a year ago, a little longer than a year ago, I tore my meniscus, and I just had the surgery in April of this year, and I thought I would be ready for the crim. If you're from the Flint area, there's the crim that happens every August, every year, and we have a lot of people that participate in the crim, and it's exciting. And I set some goals. I wanted to run the crim, and I wanted to beat my time from the year before. And I never was able to do the crim before. My wife done the crim. My mother has done the crim, you know. And I'm thinking, can I do the crim? So 2 years ago, I did the crim for the first time. And then a year ago, I did it again with the intentions of beating my record from the year before. That's the 10-mile that I ran. And I barely beat my record because in the 4th mile, I got this pain that just would not quit. I had to walk. I thought I was going to have to quit. I was mad. I was angry. I was like, you know, I prepared for this. How many of you have ever done something like this? Yeah, I mean, I did everything right. And now, you know, my dadgum calf was cramping and I can't run, and I didn't know what was going on. So afterwards, let me tell you this first. After walking about 3 of the 10 miles, I started trotting a little bit, you know, because the adrenaline was still there, and I got past the pain enough to run a little bit more. And I beat my record for the year before by it was seconds, just a few seconds. I guess God gave me that just so I can say I beat my record as if it was like way. But then this year, I couldn't run because I wasn't physically ready. And every time I try to run, I realize I'm not ready. And so what I want to talk about today is, what do you do in the meantime? Because running is very important to me. If you hear my wife talk, sometimes she jokes about this, but if I get a headache, if I go run 2 miles, the headache's gone, and I don't want any medicine, I don't want any Excedrin, I don't want nothing. If I can just go run 2 miles, get the adrenaline going, my headache's gone. And I do that on purpose sometimes, even if it's in the winter. If something's not going right, I can go run for 2 or 3 miles, and I'm back on course. I'm ready. And so now I can't do that. So it bothers me that I can't do that. So what do I do in the meantime? So we're going to go through that as we go through what Nehemiah does in the meantime today. So remember last week, we talked about Nehemiah's prayer. He's ending the first chapter of Nehemiah, and he's praying to God. He's already prayed he's already told us a lot of what his prayer was. He said to God, he reminded God of the sin that they have done. He reminded God of what God's promises were. So he's remembering all of the promises that God had promised Israel, and that basically Jesus was going to come through the nation of Israel. And so he's looking at the situation. He has heard from his brother that came from Jerusalem, from what we call a remnant of those who did not get exported out of Jerusalem. He said, how are they doing it? And his brother told him that the city, the walls are burned, the walls are down, nothing's going on. I mean, it's terrible. And remember, that's how his vision was born. He thought about all that. He said, I sat down and I wept and I cried for days, and I mourned and I prayed and I fasted. And then this is near the end of the prayer. And he said, then I said to my God, I said, give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. So he's praying that God would give him success. And that word success is really talking about the favor is the actual, when he says, give me success in the presence of this man, he wants God to give him favor. He wants God to move on the king's heart. He's saying, because I was a cupbearer to the king. So he's talking about the king. And so he's saying, I want you, God, to move on this king's heart to do something about what I'm feeling in my heart. Because he couldn't do anything about it. Remember last week we said, what could he do? He's the cupbearer to the king. He's the one that served the king his wine. He couldn't do anything about it. He's working for the king. And this is 1,000 miles away from Jerusalem, from where he's heard about this. And what he did during this time was he prayed and he planned. And last week we asked the question, why pray? And so why is it that you pray? That's the question for you today. Why pray? Why do you pray? And remember, we said prayer does not force God to do anything, right? We realize that. Sometimes we feel like if I can just pray, we pray harder. If I can pray longer, if I can pray louder, then I can get God to do something for me. We've tried it all. If you were like me and you grew up in the church like I did, I used to think that certain people could get a prayer through because of the way they sounded when they prayed. I mean, you say some people, it's like, and not like, and one person that can just put some words together to the point where it's like God just has to hear what you're saying, is Thomasine. Thomasine can pray. That girl can pray. And as a matter of fact, when I was getting ready to introduce Thomasine to my mother, and I started telling my mother I said, Mom, I think I found somebody who really loves me for who I am, just the way I am, because I told her everything. This is my whole life, no secrets. I said, and she just loves me for who I am. And I started describing her to my mother, and she said, oh, the praying lady. Thomasine can pray. So why pray? Prayer doesn't force God to do anything. Prayer is all about your relationship with the God who you are trusting him to do something for you in the first place. But one of the reasons that you pray, especially concerning your vision, and that's what we're talking about here, is your prayer keeps the vision going. Your prayer keeps the conversation going. Your prayer keeps you looking for what you're expecting for. Your prayer keeps you expecting to see something. What is it that you're expecting to see? Because we tend to, as we go through life, we tend to overlook the things that we're not expecting. We tend to overlook the things that you're not expecting. And we mentioned that a couple of weeks ago. And so what prayer does, it keeps you expecting. Even without if you just open your mouth and pray to God every day. And see, I don't agree with I've read a lot of books on prayer, heard a lot of different titles and sermons and talks about prayer. And one of the things that I've heard that I don't totally agree with is if you believe, you only need to pray about it once. How many of you ever heard that? And so you pray about it, and from then on, you just praise God for it and expect it and all that. Well, if you're still praying and praising him, that's still called prayer. And so praying keeps that conversation open. Prayer keeps us looking to God. Prayer keeps us expecting what we've been asking for. And prayer keeps that vision that you have alive. So whatever your vision is for your physical life this morning and your family life, prayer keeps that alive. It helps you it reminds you of what you're expecting, because at your own mind, it's not designed to just keep things on your mind every day. It's something you call a reticular activation system. And God puts it there because if you thought about everything that you had to think about, it would bombard your mind so much that you couldn't get anything done. So with your RAS, reticular activation system, God designed us so that you can hear impulses and see impulses that's coming, but you have figured out which ones not to pay attention to right now. It's kind of like, without that, you would think every time you heard something, I'm thinking too fast, and I can't keep up with it with my mouth. So, whew, that was funny to me. Wow. Can't keep up with all of that was going on up there. So we all have a reticular activation system that God has designed on the inside of each one of us. And it controls the thoughts and impulses that come. And once it gets used to certain thoughts, it says, okay, I know what that is. I don't have to do it. I don't think about that no more. And that's why you can even drive without thinking about, for example, when you first learn to drive, and this is an example I always use with this, when you first learn to drive, if you're, I was just talking to my grandson a couple of months ago, and a few months ago, it was in May, he got his first car, bought him his car, and he was sitting in the car getting ready to start it, and I didn't ask him. I probably shouldn't tell this. I can't tell this. I'm sorry. I'm going to move on. I don't want to embarrass him. His dad said something to him, and that's what I was going to tell you, but it might be embarrassing, and I didn't ask him. So you can ask me to tell you later, and after I get some, him, if he says it's okay, I'll share it. But when you first learn to drive, you think about everything. You got to think about the turn signal. You got to think about whether your foot's on the gas, whether your foot's on the brake. And for some of us, that's a lot different because I learned to drive down south. The first car I learned to drive was a stick shift. So you have to use both feet, And then when I got into driver's training, after I had learned to drive, it's just one pedal down there. And I was like, okay, just a brake. But I still was used to using my left foot. And then watching my dad drive, even an automatic that wasn't a stick, sometimes he had his foot on the brake and on the gas, and he could do certain things. Then I was like, woo, you can hold the brake and like making the front wheels stop and the back wheels squeal. I was like, whoa. And I did that until I bought my first set of tires. Then I realized, oh, okay, you don't do that. But anyway, when you first learn to drive, you're thinking about all kinds of things. If I want to change lanes, I got to, you're just thinking about all that. But then think about now, after you've been driving for a few years, you don't have to think about any of that stuff. You're driving, you get in the car, you start it up, you turn on the radio, or even some of you, you're still disobeying the law. You're texting, you're doing all kinds of stuff. You don't even, and you can text and still change lanes and don't miss turning your turn signal. You do all kinds of stuff. It's because your reticular activation system is controlling all of that, all the impulses of everything that's coming at you, and you are able to manage all of that. Well, God is at work on the inside of you, and prayer keeps you focused on what you need to be focused on. Because if you don't, everything that keeps coming at you, you start thinking about this, and then you start doing that, and then you start doing this, and then you forget about your vision and what you thought was important, and you're doing totally something else. So prayer keeps the vision alive. And the other thing that happens when you keep expecting God to do something, you realize that God is at work behind the scenes all the time. All the time. And if you don't pray, you forget all about that. You forget that God's doing something. I shared another story with you about the last project that I'm working on, and now I'm back in my own business. And for a year, I got out, worked for a company. And I was going back through my voicemails. And I only was going through the voicemails because this has been a few months ago, Thomasine said to me that she had tried to leave me a voice message and my mailbox was full. So I decided to start with my oldest messages and start deleting some of my voicemails. And I got to this one voicemail that was on my birthday in 2017. And I think when I mentioned this to you before, I thought it was this year, but I looked and it's 2017. This message was from 2017. I just heard it this year. And this engineer was trying to get a hold of me. And the only reason I remember it after listening to it is because I was surprised. I didn't even realize he remembered that it was my birthday, but he probably just got that from Facebook or someplace. But he wanted me to call him because they had some work they wanted me to do, wanted me to look at. And that was in May of 2017. That's the month I started working for the company I started working for because nothing was working out for me. Not even knowing that this guy's calling me, wanted me to do something, and which is where I'm ending up at now. That's where I am now. From more than a year ago, not realizing that God was still at work behind the scenes, doing stuff. So remember what Nehemiah said. He said, this is his prayer. He left the end of this chapter saying this: please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. This is the New Living Translation. Please grant me success today. This is what success would mean for him. After praying about this, he's been praying about this. He said, I mourned for days, I fasted for days. And he said, and I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said, God, grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put it into his heart to be kind to me. That's his prayer. So this is a little review. He didn't pray for a miracle. He didn't pray for God to build a wall. And see, that's one of the things that I think about when I think about miracles. And I think we miss miracles sometimes because miracles is like the stuff that happens. Miracles is like when things that happen behind the scene and you don't know how it happened, but now it's up front and it's the main scene and you see how it happens, then you call it a miracle. But when it happens behind the scenes, you don't even realize, you don't even talk about it. It's not like it was a miracle. And so I'm thinking about, Nehemiah, when he didn't ask God for any miracles. The weather didn't change. The kinds of things that when we think about miracles, like that was a miracle. That was definitely from God. Well, Nehemiah prayed and asked God to move on the king's heart so that the king would make a decision to do something, because only God can move on a person's heart. But he realized, I need help from this man. I work for this man. I'm a slave in this country, and this is the king. And see, part of the orchestration of God already is that how did he happen to be the cupbearer? That's just a position that's, people want that position. But it's a trusted position. If you got to be a slave, that's where you want to be. And so he's the cupbearer to the king, but obviously he has a whole lot of different skills that he can't even use. He's basically using the skills of a bartender every day, serving drink to the king. But based on what we see, and we've read the end of the book, based on his book, this man ended up building a city, rebuilding the walls. Such a leader. It seems like all of his skills was just wasted before that. So I'm sure some of you're thinking about what am I doing right now? It's just wasting away. I don't know. It means nothing. It's just it's useless. Well, don't say that. God is at work behind the scenes. God is at work behind the scenes. One of my business friends, when we do business together, especially one project that we were doing together, he said we ended up doing 2 projects. He said, this project is for business and this project we'll just use for cash flow. So sometimes you just need, whatever you're doing is just for cash flow. It's to keep cash flowing, and now your finances, you don't have to worry about this going, being late and that. This is cash flow. But if you got other project you're going, this is to build some business and to actually build some income. But do some things just for cash flow so you're not poor, so you're not out there with nothing. And so miracles, I look at it like this. If it's behind the scenes and it's happening, we don't think about it as miracles. But think about what Nehemiah, he didn't ask God to build a wall. He didn't say, God, if you could just build a wall. Remember the walls of Jericho, they failed. God made those walls fall. Nothing that the people did made them fall. So why couldn't he just believe we need some walls around this city? This is the city where Jesus is supposed to be born. We need to be protected. We are people, we're prestigious people. We mean something. There's generations in this city, and the walls are down. We're vulnerable to all the enemies. God, get us a wall. Instead, he didn't say any of that. He asked the king a certain question. We're going to go through that. And when the king asked him what did he want, then you'll see how he put himself in the vision. He put himself in the vision as a solution. So last week we talked about praying and planning, and the second part of that was planning. So let's look at Nehemiah's plan. Second chapter of Nehemiah, the first verse. Nehemiah says, this is the New Living Translation, he says, early the following spring. Now, it was in the latter part of autumn of the previous year when he did that first prayer, when he heard this message from his brother from Jerusalem. So it's been like in October, November of our time span, and now it's like March. So he said, early the following spring in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of Artaxerxes' reign, he said, I was serving the king his wine, and he tells us this. He said, I had never been sad in the presence of the king before. And there's a reason that you're never sad in the presence of the king. He said, I don't know how long he had been serving at this point, but he said, I'd never been sad in the presence of the king before. And he said, so the king asked me, why are you looking so sad? Now he asked him a question, But look at what the king also said. He says, you don't look sick to me. You look sad but not sick. You don't look sick to me, so you must be deeply troubled. So the king knew him that well. And I would look in the face of a person, too, who's actually serving me my wine to make sure that I don't get poisoned, you know, to make sure that, okay, you don't look sick, so the wine is good. You know, I'm not gonna, what's going on? Why? What's happening? And he says, so you must be deeply troubled. And look at what Nehemiah said next. He said, then I was terrified. Why is he so afraid? Because in the presence of the king can do anything. That's basically, he's the king. He can say something, decree it, and make it happen, and that's it. He's the king. He says, so I was terrified because you don't walk in the king's palace. You don't walk in the presence of the king with a sad face. He could just say, well, you know, okay, out of here with the wine and everything. You don't look good today. I don't even want that wine. Go. He says, so I was terrified. Although he was afraid, look at what Nehemiah said he did next. He said, but I replied, long live the king. And actually what he said just before that, he said, before I replied, he said, I said a prayer to the God of heaven. In the very first verse, he said, then I prayed. No, he's been praying all this time. It's been 4 months now. And now 4 months have passed. He's been praying and planning, and we know he's planning based on what he's going to say. But he's been praying, and now he's in the presence of the king, and the king says, why are you sad? And he's terrified, and he's ready to answer. And before he answers, he said, so I prayed to the God of heaven, and then I replied. He said, but I replied, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. There's a second thing we need to understand here. Those gates have been destroyed. That fire had burned those gates, and that city had been torn down by the country that Persia had conquered, which was basically this king's predecessors. Remember, Persia had conquered Babylon. Babylon tore all this stuff up. Babylon's the one who raided and did all of the stuff, and now Persia has conquered this whole Babylon area, and so this king has rule over that entire area. And he's saying, and so here he is in the presence of the king, and the king's predecessors has conquered this Jerusalem, tore it down, burned it, and he's saying, why shouldn't I be sad? My country is in ruins. And he might as well said, the country that you guys burned down, tore down, it's in ruin, and my ancestors, where my ancestors lived and have died and buried, and it's destroyed by fire. But look at what happens next. What did the king say to him? The king asked, well, how can I help you? Some of us would have fainted. What? Is this the answer to my prayer? The king asked, well, how can I help? And this is what he said. And with a prayer to the God of heaven, before I answered that question, I prayed and asked God. And that's why I know prayers don't have to be long. Because the king's waiting on a reply. He didn't say, wait, let me go pray about this for a day. Let me go to my prayer closet. He said, the king asked, what can I do to help? He said, I prayed, and then I replied. That was a quick prayer. Some of your prayers need to be quick like that. Just recognizing that God is listening. That's what I mean by prayer keeps the vision alive, keeps it open, keeps the conversation going. So he said to the king, he said, I replied, if it please the king, and if you're pleased with me, your servant, he's still putting himself in the right place. Your servant, he said, send me to Judah. Now let's take this real slow. Because The me he's talking about is the guy who serves the king his wine. He's the guy that the king trusts so that the king doesn't die. He said, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. Send me. And that was only after he had prayed. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, this was a bad king here. He had his woman on the throne with him. It's like, okay, we both rule together. So Nehemiah says, the king says to him, how long will you be gone? And when will you return? Let me ask you a question before I move on. How long do you think he was gone? Somebody said a year. I'll ask this question later. I'll give you a multiple choice in a minute. He said, after I told the king how long I would be gone, the king did what? Agreed to the request? That sounds like God's doing something behind the scenes. That's something we don't call a miracle, but it's happening behind the scenes. If this was a movie, you couldn't just leave that part out. You'd have to make this a scene that everybody can see where God's working on this king's heart to cause him to be kind to this guy, to cause him to be favorable to whatever he's asking. He said, how long will you be gone? He said, the king agreed to my request. So here's my multiple choice to you, A, B, or C. How long was he gone? 12 days, 12 months, or 12 years? A, B, C. How many pick A? Okay, so you know he's gone longer than 12 days, huh? Well, I mean, one thing about that, it's 1,000 miles away, and they're on horseback, so that was going to take a few days. So 12 months. How many go with B? 12 months. He was gone for 12 months. How long are you going to be gone? 12 months. Okay. Got to be. How many go for 12 years? C, 12 years. Oh, y'all trying to be so smart. You're right. He was gone for 12 years. So he tells the king, I'm going to be gone for 12 years. And the king agrees. That's a miracle. Think about your vision, whatever it is, whether it's your physical life, as I was talking about with my knee, with my hand. I don't know how long it's going to be, but there's some things I'm doing, and I plan to run again. I don't know if it'll be this next year in the Crim, but I plan to run. That's my goal. But there's some things I'm doing in the meantime. In the meantime. So, but then let's move on. Nehemiah said, while the door is open, he said, what can I do? He said, I also said, if it please the king, let me have some letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River. That's all of the governors who, they basically, this is their land. He's got to pass through. And he said, I want your letter to instruct them, to tell them to let me through safely, that I'm on business for you. Tell them I'm on business for the king. Instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on the way to Judah, because that was not going to happen if that didn't happen. So that's why you see all of what he's asking for is obviously what he had been writing down and planning before he ever got the opportunity. So remember, he prayed for an opportunity to get to tell his vision to the king, but while he's waiting for that opportunity, he's coming up with some plans. He's thinking, there's all these different governors and places are between there, and if I'm going there, I'm going to need safe travel. So he writes that down. Got to ask the king to write some letters. So what are you writing down for your vision? If you had all the resources you need, what are you writing down now, what you would do? And that's what Nehemiah did. He said, okay, I need safe travels. I need some protection. I need all. So he's telling him all this. So he asked the king, write some letters to these governors that I can give them when I pass through so that I can pass through safely. Then the next verse, he said, and He's on the roll. You know, as we say, when the treasures or doors are open, just open up your ability to receive and ask. He said, and I said, please give me a letter to address to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest. So instructing him to give me timber. So in other words, I need wood. I need some timber for all the stuff that I'm doing. So give me a letter to him. And he begins to explain why he needs this. He says, I'll need this to make beams for the gates of the temple. So obviously he had planned all that out. That's why you need plans. He said, I'm going to need for the city walls, I'm going to need some wood beams for the city walls. And look what else he added in there. He said, and a house for me. I need a house. If I'm going to be gone for 12 years, I need a house. So on the way there, I want you to send a letter to this man that manages the forest to let him give me some wood so I can build me a house. Ooh, and this is the good part right here. He said, and the king granted these requests. And why? Because the gracious hand of God was on me. So God's hand is on you. God's grace is on you. The vision that you are looking for, the things that, and if you would just write it down, whether that's your physical area, whether that's your family area, whatever area that is, pray, believe God, but write down some things based on what you're looking for as if you had all the resources right now and expect God to do it. And he said in the next verse, and we'll end the scriptures here, he said, when I came to the governor, so now he's left. He's on this journey, it's over 1,000 miles. And if you think about 1,000 miles, it's about 200 miles less than the distance from Flint to Orlando. So you think about hopping on a horse or a donkey, whatever they were riding, and you going for 1,000 miles. How long would it take you to get to Orlando? You'd be ready. If you left Detroit, you'd be ready to stop in Toledo. It's like, okay, it's far enough right here. So they're gone now. He said, on the way, he says, when I came, go back to the script. He said, when I came to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, I delivered the king's letters to them. I gave them the letters which told them to let me through, and the other letter that told them to give me some timber. So you think about this entourage of this, I don't know how long this train was, or they're taking enough stuff to build a wall around the city. And he didn't say he asked the king for this, but he says the king, I should add, had sent along an army officers and horsemen to protect me. So he was on a mission for the vision. And he opened his mouth, and when he prayed and believed that God was doing this, here's a summary of all the things here. And then first he had to convince the king to allow him to leave, then to give him financial support for what he was building. And then he also wanted him to guarantee safe travel. He wanted to give him a deal for some raw materials, all the wood and all the stuff he needed for it, and also a promotion. He didn't talk about that in these verses, but in the 5th chapter, we find out that Nehemiah was promoted to governor of Judah. Otherwise, how could he even, rule and get this done? So he becomes the governor of Judah, organized and prepared the occupants of Jerusalem. These people, think about, here's a group of people who've been living in this place. These walls have been burned for over 100 years. So the people that are living there now with the walls burned, they were born when the walls were already burned. So these walls have been burned for almost 150 years. And now he's got to wake these people up, put some vision in them as to reasons why they need a wall. So he's got to organize all that. He's got to prepare all that. And then he begins construction. So I don't know where you are in your vision, but here's our challenge for this week. is to do what you can right now. Do what you can while you're waiting. Before you execute your plan, do what you can. I didn't realize that was going to rhyme like that. Before you execute your plan, do all you can. Do what you can before you execute your plan. Okay. Because here's what's happening. While God is preparing for your vision, you see something's happening. I want you to imagine what you would do if you had all the resources. If you do that, that's how you can start to think and put some things on paper and start to move. But if you can move through that, think about what you can do. Imagine, use your imagination. It takes imagination to see what's unseen. It takes imagination to see what could be and what should be, and it's not yet. But begin to write that down. Write down your thoughts in the steps. Write that down in steps. And then remember, while you're writing those steps down, that God is at work behind the scenes, working out these steps. I don't know how it's going to happen, but God is at work behind the scenes. And so I ask you to, this week, write down at least 4 steps. Pick one area and write down at least 4 steps. And again, I'll put the 8 areas up on the screen for you just so you can see them. But we have handouts for you here, and we'll have this on our Facebook page later to remind you. But consider this week, if you haven't picked 2 areas already, consider these 2 areas, physical and family. Spouse and children is what family is. And then go through these steps with that. The physical, for example, in your action steps, here's some action steps for you. If you're thinking about your physical life, then the physical vision includes learning to cope with whatever the limitations are. And that's what I was telling you with my knee. Learning to cope with whatever those limitations are and replace them with other activities. So right now, I bike whenever I can. My physical therapist told me, she said, your bike is your friend. My chiropractor asked me one day, he said, so when does it bother you? I said, well, it bothers me when I run. He said, well, don't do that. So the next step, the next area I want you to consider is your family. In your family area, in your vision for your family, include this, your ability and responsibility to impact the next generation in a positive way. So what values are you adding to the next generation? And for some of you, when it comes to your family life, you're just starting a family, or you're thinking about starting a family, or you may be thinking about marriage, you may be thinking about children, whatever it is that you're thinking about, whatever is your vision, write down a vision for that area. What do you want that to look like? What should it look like? Because it doesn't have to look like what it did for the previous generation. It can look like what you want it to look like. And you need to write that down. Before, and especially if you're not married yet, before you ever get married, write some of those things down. You should ask Thomasine sometimes, Thomasine had a list of what she was looking for when I dropped by. She had a list with no name on it. I need a man that does this, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. She said it was just 3. Because I was going to go all the way to X, Y, Z. But she said it was just 3 things she had a list for. But as you put together your vision for your family, write down what you want, what you desire, what you feel that it should be. And begin to go through this procedure, this process, so that you can impact the next generation, and not just the next generation, even the people around you. I don't believe I'm going through whatever I'm going through with my knee just for me. I just refuse to believe it. Could be, but I just believe it's bigger than me. And I believe whatever you're going through is bigger than you, because other people need the same thing that you have and what you're going through right now. So, if you're here today and you've heard this word, you've heard these messages that's up to this point, you have in your heart, you want to make any kind of step towards knowing who Jesus is or knowing what the church is about, you can get some answers to those today. You can make whatever degree of step you'd like to make. So if you're here, you can do that by going to our starting point area, and we'll have someone give you some directions, get some information from you so that we can follow up and do that. If you are online, you can do the same thing. You can go to our website, which is gtmusa.org, and then go to our starting point area, go to the Connect area online, and you can, if you click on the Connect, then you'll get to an area where you can actually write down the things where it says Select and Connect, and you can tell us what you desire to do, and we'll respond to you and make sure you get the information that you need. So let me pray for you today, and just pray for God to help you do whatever you need to do this week in the meantime. Father, we thank you for your grace, your favor. I pray for favor for these people today, for the people that are listening, the people that work through these things in their own lives, their own visions, their families' lives, their children's lives. God, those who are desiring families, those who have physical issues that's beyond whatever their limitations are, where we can begin to dream and believe based on what you've promised, but at the same time, while we're waiting, the things that we can do, I'm asking you to reveal to us things that we can do and give us the courage this week to do what we can do to take a step to move forward in that direction. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Have a great week.